कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भुः मा ते सङ्गोत्स्वकर्मणि।
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Namaste to one and all. The session today in the afternoon, right now as we look at the panel, it is about Gita to be implemented in the professional life, for example. Of course, somebody said if Gita were to be for a later time reflective type of a session, it could have been told to Pandavas when they were in the Ajnatavas of 1 year, or when they were actually away in the forest for 12 years, it could have been told. But the reason why the Gita got told on the eve of the war between the two parties standing in between is because it is eminently practical, and it is only about through implementation that one can recognize the divine nature of ourselves. So it is not about how can we put Gita in a practical sense. If you are not putting it in a practical sense and looking at it just as a book to be revered, then you are not doing justice to Gita in the first place. That is the premise with which we need to start. Second, as we look at the panel itself, we are going to look at different ways in which Gita can be implemented. One is, how do we gain the Samyak Drusti, to have a larger perspective? In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna ji uses the word Gnanam. Gnanam is generally translated as knowledge, but actually if you look at it, original roots of it, it is gaining a perspective. It is gaining a bigger picture, being able to see the whole thing. Especially if you were to look at it from a perspective of Samyak Gnanam, or if you were to look at it from what you might call the idea of seeing everything first, seeing the big picture, that is the first step. So how do we use Gita to look at the world as a whole, look at the situation as a whole, and can we look at the big picture first and then make the decisions? Second, karma. How do we take action? Like Deshpande ji said, just mentioned about, how do we become a karma yogi? There are ways of doing karma in a sattvic way, which is the balanced perspective. Samatvam yoga uchyate, or when you look at the Sthitaprajna lakshanas, which Deshpande mentioned, or we can be rajasic, like an entrepreneur, when they are aggressive and saying this is what I need, or if I'm an executive saying my promotion is due, my manager is not taking responsibility, that is an aggressive karma. Or tamasic karma means it doesn't matter, they don't have money yet, company is running out of money, if I go ask for a raise, maybe I lose my job. That's a tamasic karma. So there are ways of doing it in a practical way. Third is the karta. This is where Gita differentiates itself from many of the things. As many of the panelists will talk about, they will talk about how the kartrutva bhav and bhoktrutva bhav, I am the one who is doing it, I am the one who is enjoying it, this role clarity is the one that we need to get in the business. How do we get it in such a way that we can actually gain value and for ourselves while serving a noble purpose? That is the third one which we need to look at. And fourth, in the buddhi, making the decisions. How do we make right decisions either in work or at home or at a university or in a biotechnology company, or when a person is being a physician? How do we make these decisions? That is another area where we have a panelist who will be able to talk about how does buddhi and Gita can be useful when somebody is in a physician context. Then comes dhruti and sukham. Dhruti means fortitude. Being in Silicon Valley, we know unless we have right kind of dhruti, that means the certain perseverance. Of course, perseverance can be two kinds. One is, I'm going to stay with it. I know everybody says there is nothing in it. This company is not going anywhere. I'm losing money. I'm going to stay with it. Or I'm going to stay with it because there is a value, there is a larger purpose that I serve and the customers are being happy. Because of that, I'm going to stay with it. So the idea of Rajasika Dhruti, Tamasika Dhruti and also Satvika Dhruti, the idea of how do you persist as a professor. We have a person who is from a Jewish background who has actually taken on Bhagavad Gita and sees there is a balance that can be brought in when to let go, when to hold on. If you are playing a card game, you know this dilemma quite well. But life is itself a card game according to Bhagavad Gita. And finally, the Sukham. Sukham can be described as something that you enjoy. But the key of Sukham actually comes when you understand what is the motivation behind that makes you feel comfortable. That is what I call enlightened self-interest. Being in the Silicon Valley, where we are, why we are conducting this in the middle is about enlightened self-interest. While we are spreading the message of Gita, how to apply it to various people, we are also going to be listening to ourselves and learning in such a way. Giving is the most powerful way to get what you want. If you keep focusing on what is it that I want, then you are the only one who is going for it and everybody else is preventing you from you getting what you want. But when you take this perspective of Satvika Sukham, where I give to everybody, then everybody else will help you to get what you want.
Dr. Prasad Kaipa is business advisor and CEO coach. He has been teaching at ISB Hyderabad, the very prestigious Indian School of Business, and he lives right here in Campbell. He has also co-authored a wonderful book, Smart to Wise. Welcome to INDTV USA with me, Justine Khanuja, and tell us a little about what inspired you to write this kind of a book, when you have combined the teachings of Western management with Gita.
The reason why I wrote that book is, for a long period of time, I realized everybody wants to be smart. You talk about smart computers and smartphones and smart homes. The world is full of smartness, except that by definition, if you are smart, somebody else can be smarter, and your job is continually to see how you are better than others. On the other hand, being wise doesn't necessarily mean you have to compete with others. You have to actually see whether you can get better than who you were. So it is more about excellence rather than competitiveness. So that's the reason why I felt the Indian principle from Bhagavad Gita of being able to become a Sitaprajna, being able to balance the perspectives with the competitiveness of the West, I thought would be good message. That's the reason why I wrote that book.
That is very well explained. In one thing, you are just comparing yourself with others. You're being competitive, and on the other hand, you are just comparing yourself with what you were. So your benchmark is you yourself, right? But how does the wisdom of Gita play into it?
The wisdom of Gita is that they talk about people having different kinds of personalities. we talk about personalities like where some people are great in what they do, but if you take them outside their field of expertise, they become very nervous. They don't really like to become comfortable. For example, in Silicon Valley, we talk about engineers who are great in their domain, but if you take them into an entrepreneurial context and ask them to make decisions and ask them to think about, how to get funding, how to do something else, they shrink. That means they want to stay deep in the domain, but they don't want to go across the top as connecting the dots, broadened picture, learning new set of skills outside their comfort zone. That you can connect it to what you call a tamasic characteristic that is described in Gita. On the other hand, there are people who are great in business development, who are wonderful to go talk to other people. They may know only skin deep knowledge, but they are willing to actually get into it and connect the dots and create opportunities for themselves. Those people are connected with what you might call a Rajasic. But a good entrepreneurial business will only be successful if you have some amount of going out, aggressively seeking, raising funds, looking at business opportunities and development, and then come down, put your head down and deliver. So we need the Rajasic sometimes and we need Tamasic sometimes. Bhagavad Gita says you have to balance between the Rajasic and Tamasic to be able to elevate yourself to a higher place. So I found the definition of wisdom works very well with the Sitaprajna characteristics that is described in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So I used that framework to take the Rajasic, Sattvic and Tamasic and create a nice framework. It works beautifully. It creates a nice project management framework for entrepreneurs, not only entrepreneurs, it can be a housewife, it can be a student, it can be an executive. They can actually use this six-part framework and put it to use to develop themselves and to excel beyond where they were before.
Awesome. That was truly very well explained as well applied, I would rather say. So, Dr. Prasad, you have been teaching at American universities and now you're also a visiting lecturer at ISB Hyderabad, which is a prestigious management institute. How do you compare the environments in both countries? How do you compare the way students take studies at that level in both countries? So what are the similarities and differences that you would like to bring out for our viewers? And if there are any major gaps, what is your suggestion?
What I find is, in terms of the raw intelligence, the Indian School of Business students are no less compared to Harvard or Wharton or Kellogg or anywhere else. Because the tests that they take, the GMAT scores are out of this world, like 700 out of 800 are the kind of average scores that they get. So the pure IQ level, I don't think there is much of a difference between Stanford or Harvard or ISB students. What differentiates is, in the Indian context, we are still a little bit more hierarchical. We are still a little bit more parent dependent. We still make decisions, whether it is regarding relationships, whether it is jobs or where they want to go, what they want to do. They listen to parents a lot more than making independent decisions. Whereas by that time, in United States, many of the students are much more self-dependent. They may ask for advice, but the decisions are made by the students. I think that is one area. There is a good part, that means they look at themselves as part of a larger ecosystem. So the ego in that respect is less. But the bad part is they are not yet able to bring creatively, and the self-confidence and the self-worth sometimes is not sufficient for them to make their own decisions. So that becomes a kind of a double-edged sword for them.
You know, one of the basic philosophies of Indian culture is Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So, Guru is worth tons of respects, It's like you just have to bow to the Guru in ancient past in India, there used to be a system of Guru Dakshina as well, you know. So how do you perceive this concept back in India now and in the United States? So because you've seen both the landscapes and you've just portrayed out some of the key points of differences. But what about this basic T-net that is a part which is deep rooted in Indian culture?
What I find is, you are right that we talk about Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu. We even talk about Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, Guru Devo Bhava. As
Even Atithi Devo Bhava.
Devo Bhava, next. So the fundamental idea of listening to a teacher, whether it is learning alphabet, whether it is getting a career guidance, whether it is spiritual guidance, the teacher has an extraordinarily important role to play in Indian context. Here they talk about mastery. So for mastery, in whether you take Tai Chi, whether you take Kung Fu, whether you take martial arts of any kind or any spiritual stuff, not only in India but also in China but also in United States, teacher has a significant role. Only thing is the name becomes different. Sometimes we call them coach. So for example, Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic in tennis or Serena Williams, all of them have got coaches. So the idea of guru, name may be changed, role may be changed, but the ability to help people to see things that they cannot see by themselves, that is the role of a teacher. A true teacher is a person who actually facilitates the students to learn, facilitates students to see things that are not directly visible to them. That is what is called, by an Israeli educational scholar who used to call that as mediated learning. A teacher mediates and facilitates learning of the student by providing a mirror so that the areas that the student does not know, does not pay attention to, becomes highlighted so that the student becomes much more rounded, well-rounded. Only problem is that takes two to tango, right? You need a good teacher, a guru, who is willing to put the student at the front of everything and do it without necessarily looking at what is in it for me. That's the reason why when you talk about Dronacharya, when you talk about any of the ancient teachers, the Guru Dakshina is something that you give in the end. So the teacher does not teach based on what is your monthly retainer or what have you paid ahead of time based on that. So those equations have changed in the 21st century. But the basic stuff about how to make things work, I think the relationship is still valuable and can be used effectively even in the complex, interdependent global world.
Well, when you talk about Dronacharya, I wouldn't totally agree because he asked for Eklavya's thumb, which he should have probably never done. But obviously, he was a good mentor for Arjuna. Not for Eklavya at all. And you have just explained how a good mentor should be, who would help students to look beyond, So it's like a three-dimensional thing, and students can look at the first and the second dimension, and the guru or the teacher or the coach, whatever you call him, helps you to look at the third angle, which you can see. So that's absolutely well said and well put. You have a message that you want to throw out to our IND TV USA viewers.
What I would say is, I think the role of us as teachers, as parents, and even beyond that, Indians and Hindus, is significant. If you notice that many of the religions here have got certain limitations and they try to really teach what is good about them somewhere else. My sense is that we have a lot of values which we have taken away, but we haven't spent enough time to understand what is the spiritual message behind Hinduism or what is the spiritual message behind India. So sometimes we are confused. If you can take some time to understand what are the subtle and tacit nature of why we do what we do, not just explicit. Don't throw the baby with the bathwater, because our religion, our spirituality, our culture has got much more depth. We are not like a plastic flower which will look eternally beautiful and which will look wonderful all the time. But you see, it neither has any smell, nor it has the pollen that allows cross-pollination to take place. So that means it doesn't have the life-giving capabilities, even though it looks beautiful. Sometimes we forget that we come from a tradition of life-giving, value-creating culture. For doing that, you have to look beyond the external beauty, external facilities, and be willing to work hard to first understand and then to be understood. If we can do that, we can be all Vivekanandas, and we can bring out the glory of the Indian culture and spirituality in a way that you don't demean other people. You are not negating other people's religion. You are not putting down somebody else. But you can put a mirror that is so beautiful. Like, if I take a non-Hindu quote, like a Jalaluddin Rumi says, how can I ever polish your mirror if you keep getting irritated at every rub? That's a beautiful way of saying. Same thing in Hindu, what you call samskar, there is Viswam Darpana Drusyamana Nagari Tulyam. Shankaracharya says, the whole world is a mirror. It looks like a beautiful thing, but you need to be able to put that mirror and differentiate what is in the mirror, what is in the real. I think that culture is something that is inborn to us. Even if you ignore it, even if you didn't pay attention to it, by introspecting, we can get access to it. Get access to it, teach it to your children, and be proud of it. Then chances are other people would love to have you around and help them to understand what we stand for, what is the message, instead of asking stupid questions like, why do you put this, or is it a single god or many gods? I think those are some things which are superficial. Now India is entering a place where we can do incredible difference, and there is an incredible opportunity. Let us not waste it.
I think that was a great response. Viewers would have definitely benefited from this beautiful message. It is like a true philosophy. We have certain universal truths in life. All these philosophies are like evergreen, perennial, universal truths, and you have just brought out some of them. But before you just leave, one final question, and that would be that you have interviewed many business tycoons in India, including Ratan Tata, for your book, and you have been mentoring a lot of them because you are a CEO coach. So what are the key learnings when you talk to them closely in person? You hear about their personal experiences and they ask you questions, you counsel them. So what is something in common that you see in the business entrepreneurials at that level?
I would say, for example, Ratan Tata I have not coached. I have met him, I have talked to him. I would say he's probably one of the wisest leaders that is alive, other than Warren Buffett in the United States. Probably Ratan Tata represents the best of the best in the world. And when I talk to other people, like when I worked with Om Prakash Bhatt, who used to be the chairman of State Bank of India, or when I talk to Kiran Majumdar, or when I talk to other CEOs of different cultures and different religions in India, I find there is an incredible brilliance in them. And there is a high interest in making a difference. There is a lots of willingness to do good as long as it also helps them to take it to the next level. Sometimes those are mixed up for a few people, but for a majority of people are beginning to see a very meaningful way they can grow to become global CEOs, not just Indian CEOs. I think we have the capability and they have the intelligence. Sometimes they have to manage their ego, and sometimes they have to look at a bigger picture than their company alone, and sometimes the values have to become more important. I think it's happening for a lot of them. There are a few mischief, makers are still there. But if we can do it, our reputation will become, stellar in the world.
Awesome. That's well put as well. And, that's why they take up the social responsibility. So many businesses are doing so many welfare activities for the poor and the needy, and wherever it is really required for the environment, for the community in general. And this not just helps the community, they are also maintaining a reasonable ethics level. You know, as you said, they want to do good as long as they think the good will come back to them. Exactly. Or they will, make a symbiotic relationship for good, right?
That's right. And that's why in Bhagavad Gita there are two messages that may be very useful. One is, as we said, detached engagement. That's about what is my role. Knowing my ego can get in the way. Sometimes I keep saying, na mama, not mine, not mine. Whether it's a role or enjoyment. That gives me a certain amount of detached but engaged. That means emotionally detached, action-wise engaged. Second one I find is a very powerful message from Bhagavad Gita is enlightened self-interest. We are not going to be selfless interest. We are not yet monks. We cannot do it. But even a Western research called by Adam Grant, one professor from Wharton, he came up with a book called Give and Take. His empirical research in the West showed in organizations, people who give more than take are the people who go up in the corporate ladder. That doesn't necessarily mean they are going to let other people walk all over them, or they are going to be doormats. It just means they know that by giving, they are creating a context in which when they ask, other people will respond. I think this is a fantastic example of enlightened self-interest. When we have these two, detached engagement and enlightened self-interest, two simple principles from Bhagavad Gita, it can help us a lot to move forward.
कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भुः मा ते सङ्गोत्स्वकर्मणि.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.